It's just a little housekeeping. Tonight's hashtag is Tag Sales Leader. So I hope you guys are going to share this, with everybody out there in social media. And our at tag is @tag_sales leader. So hopefully you guys will do some tweeting. I want to thank the sponsors of the society, without which this just simply wouldn't be possible. And I really want to recognize Sales Loft. You guys have been there since the very beginning. Kyle spoke at our original event, the very first one we had 2 years ago. And I can't thank you guys enough for your stalwart support, right, of the community and us. And again, it wouldn't be possible. Sales Fusion, my friends over there at Sales Fusion, where are you guys? There we go. You guys have been fantastic supporters of the society, and they are a silver sponsor tonight. My company, eHire, we've been supporting this organization for 2 years. Wide Angle, John Birdsong, unfortunately couldn't be here. He's on a beach in Mexico. His wife's a resident, and she got one vacation in like 3 years, and he's like, dude, I gotta go. So he had to go, but I know he misses that, but we really appreciate their support. And Configuro, who actually is our book sponsor tonight and who made our keynote speaker possible. So I want to make sure we recognize those. I also want to thank the board of directors. This is a new society for TAG. Tino, are you in the room? Can you stand up for a second? So Tina Mantella, the former CEO of TAG, is here. And he had this great idea. I guess it was like November of 14 or something like that. And he said, I hear a lot of talk and a lot of thirst to have a sales society, and I want you to lead it, right? And I said, I'm not going to do a sales society, but I'll do a sales leadership society. He said, that sounds like a great idea. And off we went. And I built an unbelievable board of people. And if you're on the board of our society, I'd like you to stand right now and have everybody here recognize you. Aaron Bush, right? Amelia, Frank, Blake, Barb, Jordan, Birdsong, Dan Bonnet, Gavin Harris, Mary Ford, and Jeff Hanlon. These guys have worked tirelessly for 2 years to bring this to you guys, and a lot of them are deserving of the awards that you're going to see tonight, but we were all opted out because we sit on the board. And I just want to recognize how awesome they have been and how incredibly important this has been for our community. So I want to thank you guys for that. I also want to talk about our mentorship program. In the class of 2016, we started a mentor program that paired together 20 senior sales leaders and junior sales leaders or mid-tier sales leaders, and we've had a lot of success in that. And this year, we've actually used wide-angle technology to automate that process, and we're hoping to increase that mentorship for the sake of sustainability. It's super important that we build an ecosystem that doesn't just provide content and just doesn't get us all together in a room to drink some beer or learn something. It creates a long-term, sustainable ecosystem for sales leadership because it is critical to our city and to our state's economic development. And that leads me to our broader mission. We created this organization really to edify sales leadership and the innovation ecosystem that we actually have in Georgia and form it as a pillar of why great companies can come to Atlanta and succeed, or why people can build great companies here. And there's a lot of people in this room, right, that are extremely talented and gifted sales leaders, and I want to make sure that I recognize that. Also, from what I can gather, I know there's well over $1 billion of sales responsibility and sales leadership in this room right now. So I want you guys to give yourselves a hand. It's an impressive crowd of talented people. Okay, we're going to get down into the keynote. I want to introduce Jody Hamlet, who is the CEO of Configuro. Some of you guys know who they are. He's going to tell you a little bit more about what they do, but they brought the keynote speaker and bought all the books for you guys, and I'm proud to introduce you.
Hello. Thank you for the welcome. Configuro is a company that helps sales organizations implement Salesforce better. Simple as that. And our name, Configuro, means configuration hero. So we take the complexity out of doing those Salesforce implementations and make CRM more effective for sales teams. Okay. We also build solutions on the platform, and we do implementations, training, etc. We're located here in Atlanta. Right around the corner. We've done over 800 projects in Salesforce and have been in business 8 years. So thank you. Appreciate the welcome. But I do want to introduce you guys to Lisa McLeod. Lisa is the sales leadership consultant and best-selling author who created the Noble Purpose in Business methodology. She's worked with organizations like Dave & Buster's, Google, in creating really the accelerating part of the competitive differentiation and emotional engagement. Her best-selling book, Selling with Noble Purpose and Leading with Noble Purpose, reframe business for leaders around the world. She has keynoted in over 25 countries and helped over 100 organizations. And she has been featured on Wall Street and also the Today Show. So I do want to take time to introduce you to a very dynamic person, Lisa McLeod.
Thank you, John. So, hopefully I have my lav mic will work. So, we're all here. We're salespeople. Everybody's had, what, 1, 2 glasses of wine in them? So, I want to ask you a question. What's the purpose of business?
Change the world.
Make money, profit, grow. Somebody said change the world. Serve customers. How do we measure success in business? You guys are salespeople. Sales. What I want to suggest to you is if your sole measurement for success is revenue and your sole purpose is to make money, that you are in fact destined for mediocrity. I'm 1 minute in, you're already screwed. So I want to talk to you about what's actually going on in business and the difference between companies who are merely good and companies who are absolutely exceptional. And the difference often sits in sales. But we need to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room. Right now, we have a crisis of disengaged employees. Over 50% of people are disengaged. And if you're not one of those people, you've certainly called on them, haven't you? And one of the things I say when I talk to organizations is look to the person next to you. So everybody do it right now. Look at the person next to you. Odds are one of you hates your job. I hope it's not you. So why does this actually matter? Well, it matters because something really interesting has happened in business. Now, I'm a longtime salesperson. I started out my career in sales, and I'm a former Procter & Gamble sales trainer. So I get it when it comes to the numbers. But if you've been around for a while, one of the things that you've seen is that the scrutiny for numbers has become ever more intense. I mean, how many of you have been in this profession for more than 15 years? How many of you have been in sales for more than 15 years? Okay, when you started in sales, your boss could not look at your daily numbers on their phone, okay? So there's a good news and a bad news portion of this. The good news portion is we have live time results now that we never had in the past. The bad news portion of this is a lot of the accountability measures that were supposed to improve business actually stripped the meaning and the purpose from business. And they resulted in people that are just showing up and phoning it in. But if you're here and you've made a commitment to the sales profession, you're probably not one of those people. So let me tell you how I came about this concept of noble purpose. You know, as I said, my background is in sales, and I ran a sales consulting firm for a long time, which is what I do now. And about 8 years ago, one of our clients asked us to study their sales team. And this was really interesting because how many of you manage salespeople in the room? How many of you have ever managed salespeople? Okay, if you manage salespeople, you know that you typically have a bell curve of performance, don't you? Okay, you have the poor performers, the solid performers, and then you have the exceptional performers. Well, if you've managed salespeople, you know that the difference between the poor performers and the good performers, that's pretty easy to figure out, isn't it? You know what the differences are. Good salespeople show up. They make sales calls. They know their product. They get out of bed on Monday morning. They do all those kinds of things. But what's harder to put your finger on is the difference between good performers and exceptional performers. And that was what this company wanted us to figure out. Now, it was really interesting the way that they went about it, because they said, you know, we're a science-based company. So what they had us do was a blind study. We went out in the field and we worked with their salespeople. And they said, now, you're with some people who are good performers and some people who are exceptional, but you're not with any poor performers. And the idea was, if it was a blind study, that my team and I could hopefully figure out what was the difference between the good performers and the exceptional performers. Maybe we would see something that they hadn't spotted. And if you've run a sales organization, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that magical thing that makes the top performers different. And we all want to package it, and we want to bottle it, and we want to replicate it. But it's hard to put your finger on what that thing is. We know it shows up in the numbers, but what is it? And so that was the challenge with this study. And so we went out in the field and we worked with all the salespeople and we followed them around while they made their calls. You can imagine how excited they were with this. And so we followed them around. How many questions did they ask? What did they say? What did they record? How did they use a CRM? All those kinds of things. And we did one-on-one interviews. And it was all in search of that magic thing that makes the top performers different. So we were near the end of the study, and I was with a representative in Phoenix, Arizona, and I decided to ask her a question that was not on our list of questions. I'm sitting in her car, I'm about to get out, and go catch my flight, and I looked at her and I said, what do you think about when you go on sales calls? What's in your head? And I will never forget her answer. She said, you know, I don't tell this to very many people, but I always think about this one particular patient. You know, this was a medical company. They sold to doctors. And she said, I was standing in front of one of my doctor's offices. I had on my suit, my name badge. And this little old lady came up to me. And she tapped me on the shoulder and she said, excuse me, miss, are you the representative for this drug? She said, I looked down at her and said, yes, ma'am, I am. She said, the little old lady looked up at her and said, well, I just want to thank you for giving me my life back. Because prior to taking this, I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. But now, I can get on a plane. I can fly across the country. I can visit my grandkids. I can get down on the floor and play with them. So thank you. And as this sales representative is telling me this, she's getting really emotional. And I found myself getting emotional as I was listening to her. She went on and she said, you know, that's my purpose. That is why I do this job. So I got out of the car, got on the plane, flew back here to Atlanta. It's a long flight. I had lots of time to think. And I kept turning it over and over in my head, and I kept thinking, this purpose thing, and you gotta keep in mind, this was 8 years ago. Nobody was talking about this back then. And I just kept thinking, is that the thing? Is that the magic thing that we've all been looking for? So I went back to the interviews and I looked at the anecdotal comments and I was searching for that sense of purpose, and I found it. I found 5 representatives who talked about, you know, my dad was a doctor. It's a harder job than people realize. I just want to make the doctor's life better. I found a representative who said, I'm so excited to share this science. Found 5 people. At the end of the study, the biotech company asked us, who do you think our top people are? And I said, I think it's these 5. And I was 100% right. And that one representative who had spoken in such emotional terms about her customers was the #1 representative in the country for 3 years in a row. For me, that was the turning point. And so I decided, I'm going to study this. I'm going to study this across all other organizations and all other companies. And I eventually ended up coining the phrase noble purpose. Because I tell you what happened It wasn't just people who sold life-saving drugs. It wasn't just people in healthcare. It wasn't just people in nonprofits. It was people who sold technology. It was people who sold concrete. It was people who sold all kinds of things. The top performers were always the people who were driven by this sense of improving the lives of their customers. And now here's the really interesting thing, and you'll read about this in the book. The people who are driven by what we now call noble purpose, to improve the lives of their customers, they actually outperform the people who are focused on targets and quotas. And you know what? You're all nodding, because I am not telling you anything that you did not already know in your heart to be true. Because here's the thing, we study sales and there's all kinds of science to it, and it's about how many calls you make and how good your product information is and how much information you track and how you target and how you focus it, and it's all those things. And those things will make you good. But to be truly exceptional, there is an emotional element to this. And we all know it when we see it. I want you to compare and contrast two salespeople. One comes in thinking, I'm gonna close this deal. I'm gonna make President's Club. I can see it now. I'm going on the trip. I'm gonna be 130% over quota. Who is that salesperson thinking about? Themselves. And they're not wrong, because that's what we've taught them how to think. But compare that. Imagine their competition walks in and says, I am here to improve your condition. I am here to improve your life, to improve your business, and I'm gonna do a deep dive into who you are and who your business is, and we're gonna make some improvements. Who's gonna close the bigger deal? It's really, really obvious. And it's a mental thing that happens before you go into a call, and it happens in every level of an organization. But when we have the big sales meeting, what do we talk about? Woo, the numbers! We all talk about the numbers, don't we? So if you take nothing else away from this conversation, for you and for your team, the more you can talk about the impact you have on customers, and I don't mean that generic, our value prop, blah, 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 sanitized language. I mean true, real stories about how whatever you sell has improved the customer's condition. The more you can make that the narrative of your organization, the data tells us you will be more successful. How much more successful? Well, according to the data, over 350% more successful. Okay? So a former Procter & Gamble colleague of mine, a gentleman by the name of Jim Stengel, researched this. And companies, organizations who have a noble purpose, whose North Star is to improve their customers' condition, outperform the market by over 350%. The data could not be more clear. But the challenge to us in the sales profession is, this is not where our mind goes, is it? Where does our mind go? Our mind goes to my quota, my number, my boss, my this. But the more you can center yourself and have absolute clarity about how you make a difference to the customers, two things will happen. You will be more successful, and guess what else? You'll also be happier. Because you see, human beings have two fundamental needs. We want connection, and we want meaning. Another way to say this, a friend of mine is a parenting expert, and she refers to these two needs as belonging and significance. You see, human beings want to be part of something bigger than themselves. We want to make a difference. This transcends age, race, sex, culture. It is innate in us. We want to matter. And when you treat people like a number, they will return the favor. So when a lot of leaders come to me, one of the things that they say is, we're being commoditized. Deals are coming down to price. We're being, it's this apples and oranges things, but our customers just don't see it. Well, the problem is not what's happening at the end of the sale. The problem is the narrative at the beginning of the sale. And so the more you can be focused on what we call customer impact, and I want to be really, really clear on this. Customer impact is subtly and critically different from customer-centric. In a customer-centric organization, people can be very reactive to customers. Oh, the customer wants it. Oh, the customer wants it. And they all run around because the customer wants it. If you have noble purpose and you are focused on the impact that you have on customers, you don't always do what the customer wants. You do what the customer needs. You know, Henry Ford very famously said, if I'd asked them what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. Organizations with a noble purpose have absolute clarity about how they make a difference to customers, and they are very assertive about pursuing that. They're not there just to play some mediocre game and win the business. They're there to make a difference. So what happens when you don't have a purpose? When the narrative of profits become your end game? Well, we've all seen it, haven't we? So General Motors, the ignition switch issue. What happened? Read the Valukas report, just what was this now, 2 years ago? It was very clear profits were paramount. Then we go to Volkswagen. Do you know what the CEO of Volkswagen said just before their big emissions test debacle? He said, our #1 goal as a company is to beat Toyota. He had been on that for years and years and years. Our goal is to beat Toyota. Not in quality, not in customer satisfaction. No, they wanted to beat Toyota in sales. And guess what? The year before they started faking all the emissions thing came out, they did beat Toyota in sales. Wells Fargo, another example. About 3 or 4 years ago, the CEO of Wells Fargo said, cross-selling is the cornerstone of our strategy. And he made these comments very publicly. And I was speaking at a banking conference. And have you ever been in one of those situations where the words come out of your mouth and it's almost like a thought bubble, like in a cartoon? You're like, who said that? And then you go, oh man, that was me. So he said cross-selling is a critical part of our strategy. And so then I got up there and said, you know, from where I sit, cross-selling is not a strategy, it's a sales tactic, and it's probably one that's going to get you in trouble. And then I got embarrassed and shut up, which, you know, again, in hindsight, I might have talked a little more about that. But what happens is, and I'm saying this to a room of not only salespeople, but sales leaders, if you make profit your end game, you will not create a sustainable business model. And I want to be really, really clear on this. Having a noble purpose, being clear about the impact that you have on customers, doesn't mean philanthropy. It doesn't mean giving away the store. It doesn't mean just being a nice citizen and giving to charity. It means having a laser-like focus on your end game, which is the customer. And it produces greater profits. It produces deals at higher margin. It produces competitive differentiation. And it produces emotional engagement. You know, it's funny, we think that we can ignore emotions in business, but I've yet to have a CEO tell me, you know, if there's one thing I could change in this company, I wish our people didn't care so much. You know, these people are just so passionate, it's really making me crazy. Nobody says that. Because you see, logic makes you think. Logic will result in a transaction. When you bring that passion, that belief into your work, that's when your company starts to transcend your products and become one of those iconic companies that outperforms the market by 350%. So there's 3 questions I want you to ask yourself, and they're in the book, so you don't need to write them down. How do you make a difference? And again, I don't mean your generic value proposition, but how do you improve life for your customers? How do you do it differently than your competition? And on your best day, what do you love about your job? Because your ability to answer these 3 questions and your ability as an organization to answer these 3 questions is the difference between being mediocre and being absolutely exceptional. It's the difference between those 50+ % of people that aren't engaged and people that show up and love their jobs. And I'll tell you another secret. How many of you have ever had a bad day at work? You go back to these 3 questions, and this is what gives you the resilience to go after it on another day. So here's the thing I'm going to close with. Everybody in sales has a number. Whether you're the CEO, whether you're a VP of sales, whether you're sitting out there in a territory, everybody has a number. It's going to be right here, lodged in your brain, all the time. But the more you can quell that thought process, that number, and the more you can shift your mind and your organization's mind to making a difference in the lives of customers, the more successful you will be and the happier you'll be. So if you take nothing else away from this conversation, know your job matters. Sales matters. It is a noble profession, and when you embody that, when you step into that, you change the game. You change it for you change it for your customers, and you change it for this world that we call sales. So thank you.